Welcome into another episode of FCS Rundown with Criswell and the coach. It's our third edition, back for another exciting episode. I'm your host, Josh Criswell, joined as always by my co-host, the coach, Gene Clemons, and we finally made it. This wacky spring season is coming to an end, at least the regular season. Then it starts all over next week with the FCS playoffs. 16 teams make it in, 10 auto bids, 6 at-large spots up for grabs. Going to get into that here in a little bit, but first things first, we've got some awards to hand out. It's about that time of year. We've got the Walter Payton Award, the Buck Buchanan Award, the Eddie Robinson Coach of the Year Award, and the Jerry Rice Award going to the nation's top freshmen. Kind of a weird year to make these award picks just because the resumes are so different, due to the varying amount of games that different teams have played. But I guess, first things first, Gene, who are you going with for your Walter Payton Award for the top offensive player in the country?
I think I've been singing his praises all season. Eric Berrier for me is a guy who I just think, when you're talking about a leader, when you're talking about a performer, somebody who really knows how to command an offense, lead a team, has an opportunity to make a deep run into the playoffs, I think he's a perfect fit for what this award should be. And I'm more intrigued about the fact that we haven't even seen him use his running dynamic this year. I believe he's run very sparingly this year because a lot of times he has not had to. It'll be really interesting when they get into the playoffs, especially because they're not going to be the conference champions. So it'll be interesting to see what seed they get if you start to see that running dynamic start to come out now that it's win or go home. But for me, that's my Walter Payton Award winner this year.
Yeah, I think Eric Berrier is a great pick. He was one of the guys I mentioned preseason, and as the season rolled on, I talked about a little bit, a great show that a couple of Sam Houston players do. Dalton Meyer and Ryan Humphreys, they host a walk-on radio. They had me on, and I kind of was talking about it. To me, it's almost a 1A and 1B conversation with the two Erics, Eric Berrier and Eric Schmid. And, I guess just to kind of give a differing opinion, I'll give you my reasons why Eric Schmid, in my opinion, is deserving of the award. You look at his stats, 13 passing touchdowns, 4 rushing, all 4 coming in that game against Lamar, a do-it-all threat, the leader of the most productive offense, the most exciting offense in the entire country, in my opinion, especially as we saw in the early games. When they're healthy and they're clicking, there's nothing like that Sam Houston offense. You saw him put up, I think they hung a 71 burger on Nichols earlier in the season when they were at number 7 in the country. So for me, I'm going in the spirit of best player on, at least in my opinion, the most proven team. If you talk about a resume, that's Sam Houston to me. Them, Delaware are kind of 1A, 1B, as well as those one-loss Missouri Valley schools that are going at it this weekend. But best player, best team kind of theory, I'm going to roll with Eric Schmid for my Walter Payton Award winner.
I hear you, and I don't think that's a bad pick. I think that for me, he was my winner early on. Last few games started turning the ball over a lot more than I'm accustomed to seeing them turn the ball over this year. And I think for me, that's the line. That's how close it was. It was just that simple for me to be able to look at something else and go, well, that's where I'm going to make the delineation at. It'll be interesting to see, like I said, the seeding for this playoffs, someone that's a high seed is going to have to run into an Eastern Washington or Jacksonville State. That is a long day. That is a long day for anybody. And so it'll be really interesting to see how that works out.
Absolutely. And you made a great point, and for me, I actually mentioned it on Walk On Radio that I think those 2 interceptions the past 2 games might be something that tilts the award race in Eric Berrier's favor. You could have argued that Eric Schmid was the leader, before those 2 games. But, I think another thing too, something that at least that I factor into it is that a comparison that sort of comes to mind, not the same type of player and everything like that at all, but it's almost kind of like with Brett Favre. You have a guy that's going to sling the ball around. He's going to take those deep shots, going to have those huge touchdown plays that go for 50, 60 yards. But as comes with that, we all know you do get some turnovers from time to time, and definitely had 2 of those each of the past 2 weeks. So that could be something that factors in. I think if Sam creeps into a top 3 seed, though, all of a sudden that could potentially play a factor in some of the voters' minds. But, moving ahead, Buck Buchanan Award goes to the top defensive player in the country. This is, I think, a little bit tougher one. I think it's a little bit easier to find a quarterback that stand out and kind of say that they're the favorite in the Walter Payton discussion. The defensive side of things is a little bit different. You put out a really great article earlier this week, mentioned a couple guys. I'm going to steal one of your picks, but, who are you going with as the top defensive player in the FCS this spring?
Well, I'll go back to, again, my earlier pick my defensive pick. It was hard because there was not a lot of guys who were standing out. Bryson Armstrong over at Kennesaw State, who's been excellent for years. But I think that if he was to receive that award, it would be more like a Lifetime Achievement Award. James Kaxer for North Dakota State, who I think just has a nose for the ball. But for me, Colby Campbell out of Presbyterian, if you're looking at a guy who just always seems to be around the ball, he's a guy that comes to mind for me. 89 tackles, like 89 tackles. And we're not talking about 89 tackles in a 10-game season. We're talking about 89 tackles in, I believe, 5 or 6 games. So to put that level of production up in such a small sample size, you really have to be rewarded. And that would be my pick if I was going with somebody for the award.
Definitely can't disagree with you there. You laid out the case perfectly in your article for The Athletic earlier this week. I'm going with Colby Campbell out of Presbyterian. I mean, on pace for over 100 tackles, and I think what's going to be a 7-game season. That's incredible. And for me, I love to give, the small school guys some love. Obviously, they're Presbyterian isn't going out there. They're not going to be winning a national title this season. But I think, a guy like Colby Campbell absolutely deserves some recognition.
I think he's a guy who will find his way onto an NFL roster, because you can't have enough people who just have a nose for the ball. He just knows how to get to the ball. It's not about size. It's not about technique. Just some people have that ability to seek out the ball and go get the ball. I could see him being a longtime special teamer. I could see him being a situational guy on a defense. Somebody that people want to keep an eye out for. This won't be the last time you hear from him.
I completely agree with you there. Moving on to our Jerry Rice Award to the top freshman. For me, it's undisputed. I have an honorable mention in South Dakota State. Quarterback Mark Granowski has them, a guy that no one thought was even going to be starting whenever this year began. All of a sudden has helped lead the offense of a team that's on the verge of a possible number 1 overall seed. But for me, I think the easy choice and undisputed candidate for the top freshman in the country has to be Cameron Ward out of Incarnate Word, a guy who nobody really knew much about at all, a freshman down there. The Cardinals lose a former Southland Conference Freshman of the Year in John Copeland to the transfer portal. I said they were going to be arguably the worst team in the Southland Conference, and boy, did they prove me wrong. Cameron Ward, first college season, closing in on 2,000 yards, going to hit that this Saturday against Sam Houston. 22 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. I mean, you just don't really see these numbers from a freshman quarterback very often, especially in an abbreviated 5-6 game season.
Absolutely, and I think that's I think he's going to win it. Statistically, it's going to be hard for him to be denied. But I will throw a guy out there that I think has had a fantastic season as a freshman, and that is Tony Musket, the quarterback from Monmouth. I've been very impressed.
Talk about an all-time great QB name.
No, it's absolutely. Musket, you think about the gun, you know what I'm saying? Like Monmouth has an offense. And I slept on their offense being able to be dynamic enough to take over games versus better competition. But what they were able to do against Kennesaw State really impressed me. And it's a shame that they've only played a small amount of games, because I would love to see what his statistics would look like over 7-game sample size, or a typical spring, what we're seeing as a 6 to 7 game sample size for these spring season. Because I think that he would be legitimately a candidate, especially because I don't see many people on that side beating them. They could be an undefeated team with a freshman quarterback at the helm. And we always know that when it comes to these awards, quarterbacks are going to get a boost over running backs. But I think that the statistics for Cameron Ward is something that you can't ignore. And I think that's probably the way it's going to go as well.
Yeah, and with Monmouth, they're going to be a really interesting team to watch as far as seeding goes, because if they get overlooked by the committee and get a lower seed, I think they're the perfect team that if you're throwing down some money to pull off an upset, I think Monmouth is definitely a team to keep an eye on. But, before we get to talking more about our at-large bids as well as our betting picks of the weekend, we got to talk about the Eddie Robinson Coach of the Year award to close it out. It's been a unique year, a lot of teams with really good stories, but who would you say is your top pick for Coach of the Year at the moment?
Scott Weichenheim. I think that it's pretty easy to see. We can't even remember. None of us were even, and I'm older than you, none of us even remembers a winning season for VMI, let alone a season that's been this great. For them to zig when everybody else zagged and decide that, you know what, every other service academy, they're doing the triple option. We're going to go a different way. We're going to go with the air raid. And someone, one of my readers brought up a really good point. They said that the reason why VMI was able to do that is because they're playing against talent that is their equal. And that's why they were able to make the transition to the air raid. But not every team that makes the transition to the air raid is able to have success like VMI has been able to have success versus teams that are very good. So what he was able to do, what he has them on the verge of doing, I think it's undoubtable. That's my Coach of the Year this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it perfectly for all the reasons you mentioned. I have him as my Coach of the Year, assuming obviously that they go out and close out the season with a rivalry win over the Citadel this weekend. If they do that, I just don't see a way. I think he could be close to a unanimous candidate if they end up, I think, 6-1 and getting into the playoffs. But there are two guys that I have to mention. Obviously there is a couple of guys with 1 losses that I got to give a shout out to, John Grass at JSU and Bubba Schweigert at UND. But I think 2 coaches that you kind of have to keep an eye on is, and it's kind of funny because of one of the coaches' connections to both, but it's Sam Houston head coach Casey Keeler and Delaware head coach Danny Rocco. You look at the Bearcats, they came into the year outside of the top 10. All of a sudden, they're on the verge of a national seed, beating teams by an average of 27.2 points per game. And, they've had some somewhat recent close games, 8 14-point wins, but those games were a lot closer on paper than they actually were. I mean, there were several occasions where you felt like the Bearcats were going to turn it into another blowout, and there was never a moment where you felt like victory was really in doubt. So, a tough one, obviously, for some of the bettors out there, as anyone that listens to the show knows. But
absolutely,
I guess maybe the one thing that might hurt Casey Keeler's case for Coach of the Year would just be the absolute, embarrassment of riches that Sam Houston has on both sides of the football. But, as far as Delaware, they're another interesting one because they were, far more overlooked than Sam Houston. If they end up finishing this thing out 5-0, beating teams by more than 3 touchdowns a game, relevant, for the first time since Casey Keeler had them in those national title games, I think you got to put Danny Rocco in the conversation as well.
Yeah, and I think I really just don't think anyone's going to beat, watching.
Those are purely if VMI loses this weekend. That's the only way anyone else comes in the equation.
Absolutely. I think the story is just too good there, but I would like to give a shout out to Doc Gamble down at Arkansas Pine Bluff because UAPB has been a doormat for years. We used to joke. I went to Arkansas Tech, which is a Division II school, and we used to joke that we would go over to Pine Bluff and smoke Pine Bluff. Like that's the type of, reputation that Pine Bluff had for years. They were the HBCU team that HBCU teams wanted to schedule because it was a guaranteed win. And so now to see them go out, have wins over Southern, win over Grambling, like to be able to change the narrative about their team to where they're in position to actually have a chance to do some things, that's a beautiful thing to see. And all praise goes out to Doc Gamble and his staff for what they've been able to do and how they've been able to change the culture over there in Pine Bluff.
Absolutely. That's another amazing story. I think, they're the perfect example of a what if, what if they got another 3 games or so on the schedule? Because then I think he's absolutely in the conversation. But, I think if it was only, I think it is 3 games for them. So I think that's the one thing that will keep him from winning it. But, absolutely, that's another great story, kind of right up there with VMI. And that's been one of the cool things, about this kind of wacky, unique spring season. But spinning it forward, obviously, we do a lot of gambling talk on the show. But before we do that, real quick, Gene, I got to get you, who's your first team in and last team in, first team out for the FCS at large bids at the moment? Just real quick, rapid fire response.
Okay, so real quick, last team in will be interesting because I think depending upon what happens this weekend in the CAA, they go from either 2 to 3 teams in. So I think a last team in type of situation could be Richmond or Villanova if one of those 2 teams are able to pull the upset this week. With that being said, probably last team out is going to probably come down to something like UC Davis, who I think has put together a really good season, but they've fallen short. It'll also be interesting to see what happens that South Dakota State, North Dakota State game, because if North Dakota State loses, that's 2 losses versus some other teams that only have 1 loss. Would North Dakota State be left on the outside looking in with 2 losses? Or would they just put 4 teams in? That'll be interesting to see.
You talk about the Missouri Valley Conference getting 4 teams in, and I think, for me, it's there's 2 teams. It's Eastern Washington's in. It's Southeastern Louisiana and Missouri State. I think Southeastern Louisiana, if they beat SIU by 3 touchdowns or more, they jump in and take that last spot. If they don't deliver that impressive of a win, I think it's your 3rd or 4th Missouri Valley co-champion, Missouri State, getting into the playoffs. So going to be interesting regardless, but we've got our esteemed producer David Graff on the show to help us with our rapid fire picks. Before we do that, though, I know we always give our favorite bet of the weekend. What are you rolling with, Gene?
My favorite bet of the weekend is Delaware -6.5. I think that's a gift. As much as I think Villanova has put together a solid season, I just don't see them being able to handle Delaware and score with them. Delaware, one of the best defenses in the CAA. Villanova, one of the worst defenses in the CAA. That's usually a recipe for disaster. So that's nothing's a guarantee, but if you lose money on Delaware, we lost money together. Trust me.
Absolutely. And, for me, I think it goes back to the Southland Southeastern Louisiana, a team I just got through talking about. My pick's going to be them as somehow a 5.5-point underdog to Southern Illinois. I'm not really sure. I think this might be the perfect example of a little bit of a Missouri Valley bias and then a negative perception about the Southland Conference. Because if you look at what these 2 teams have done, Southern Illinois has that 24-point win over North Dakota State, but that seems like ages ago right now at this point. I mean, since then, they're only 2 wins. They won by 1 point, won another one by 8, also had some really ugly losses. I think they got beat by 41 by South Dakota State not too long ago. Then you look over to the other side, Southeastern Louisiana, a lot of people have written them off, and they're definitely on the outside looking in, need some help, I think. But, they had that early season loss to Sam Houston, the toughest anyone's played them, came within 5, had a chance to pull ahead late, and the Bearcat defense got a big 4th down stop to seal that win. But, their last 2 games beat Lamar by 30 points and then had a huge win over Nichols last week in the River Bell Classic, beat them by a touchdown to keep their playoff hopes alive. So give me Southeastern Louisiana and the 5.5 points all day long. That does it for our favorite bets of the weekend. David Graff, it's rapid fire time.
Well, you guys picked 2 games that were on my list for the quick picks here. So let's just start off with Delaware -6.5 at Villanova. We know where Gene lies. Josh, well, how about you?
I'm also going with Delaware. They're beating teams by over 3 touchdowns this season, so I think they're going to comfortably beat a Villanova team that seems like they haven't played in a couple months either.
All right, and then Southeastern Louisiana. We know Josh loves Southeastern Louisiana +5.5 at Southern Illinois this weekend. Gene, how about yourself?
I like Southeastern Louisiana as well. I think this is a great place if you want to hedge your money on a money line pick. This would be a great pick to pick as a money line pick. Pick up about I think it's minus 210 right. I mean plus 210 right now on a 5.5.5 point. So that would definitely be something I'd look into.
And then we're going to head out to kind of sort of the Pacific Northwest, Missoula, my old stomping grounds. Portland State is +17.5 at Montana this weekend.
It's so difficult, these games, because we haven't really seen them do much. However, I do love what Portland State did last year. I think they're on the rise. I think that they have an opportunity to have a really good program going into the future. But 17 without actually seeing people play, I just can't do that type of stuff. So give me that 17. I'll take Montana.
Yeah, give me Montana as well. I mean, I'm a big Sky Country guy. I think Montana is one of my favorite places in the world. If a reporting job ever opens up in Kalispell, Montana, as me and you, David Graff, has talked about, I think I might be packing up and leaving Huntsville. But no, I'm going with Montana all day. I think that they're a really strong program, and they're obviously this is their Super Bowl this spring.
Just so we're clear, Montana is -17.5. You want that, Gene?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said Portland State was -17.5. Yeah, give me Montana. Then I'm like, what is going on? Yeah, I'll take Montana. Much better established program. You know what you're getting out of them. Although I do like what Portland State has been doing.
All right, and then one of the biggest games on the slate this weekend: South Dakota State +1.5 at NDSU.
I can't believe that North Dakota State continues to roll out the quarterback that they continue to roll out. I would have thought at some point they would just go, you know what? We're just better off trying anybody else full-time than this guy. But they keep rolling him out, and he's going to cost them a game this week. I'll take South Dakota State.
I'm taking South Dakota State and the 1.5 points. I'm actually, going to look for a good money line on that one. But for the same reason you put it, these are 2 very evenly matched teams at every position except for that quarterback spot. I mean, I mentioned earlier Mark Granowski. He's been one of the top freshmen in the entire country. North Dakota State, it seems like, every time you look at them, it seems like the story is they got the win.
Don't say his name. Don't say his name.
It wasn't about quarterback play. They have not won a game because of quarterback play this year. It's been an absolute problem for them all season long. And then you look at the other side of it, Mark Granowski, he might be a freshman, but he stepped up in some big moments. First thing that comes to mind is that game-winning drive against Northern Iowa to start off this really strong campaign that has them near the top of the polls. So they give me South Dakota State in the game that everyone's eyes are going to be on this weekend.
I'll tell you this, they better get North Dakota State now, because the quarterback they have coming in the fall, he is a different cat. It is not going to be the same thing. So they better get North Dakota State now. They are back in the fall for sure.
Our final quick pick of the weekend, Richmond +12 at James Madison.
James Madison has been clearly the better team in the CAA, but hasn't always looked dominant. I think this is the game that they put it together and show people, hey, we're about to go into the playoffs with all pistons firing. Johnson, the quarterback, he just needs to be able to manage well, not turn the ball over. The running game is phenomenal. The defense is great. I'll give up that 12 points reluctantly, but I'll give that 12 points up.
Yeah, for me, I'm going with James Madison minus 12 in this one. Neither team's really blown me away. But I think the biggest thing for me is we have seen these moments where, yes, James Madison has struggled, but there's also been moments where they're clearly looking like the national title contender that they are. I think with a potential number 1 overall seed on the line this weekend, they roll in and they beat Richmond by 3 touchdowns.
All right. No disagreements here. Both you guys are on Montana.
That's boring.
Delaware.
Man, did we really go on the same
Louisiana,
thing on every single pick? You know what? Let me zag here. It's a little bit of a toss-up, so I guess to fade the public a little bit, I will go with Richmond to lose by less than 12 points.
You know what? And while I'm at it, I'll take Portland State to cover that 17. I mean, to not cover that 17, or yes, to cover the 17. Excuse me. That way, we're just not all on the same thing. By the way, this should be a hint to everybody out there to fade those 2 games.
Yeah, just stay off of those 2 completely.
Awesome. Dave, what are we doing, Dave? What are we doing?
All right. Well, then with revised picks, we've got Gene on Portland State plus 17.5. Josh wants to lay the 17.5 on the Grizz. Both of you are on Delaware minus 6.5, Southeastern Louisiana plus 5.5, South Dakota State plus 1.5. And then our final toss-up, Josh wants Richmond to lose by less than 12, and Gene will reluctantly lay the 12. As always, gamble responsibly.
As always.
Appreciate it, David Graff. Now, as we move into our final and my favorite segment of the show, it's time to give out that big money winner, that parlay of the weekend. Who are you rolling with, Gene?
It was a tough one this week. There's some really quality games out there, some good competition. For me, I try to find the easy money, and so the money didn't look as easy as it's looked in the past this week. But I do have a 3-pick for you. I like Delaware minus the 6.5. I like VMI. I think it's minus 5.5. Last time I checked it, minus 5.5 for VMI, which I was really surprised that they're less than a touchdown favorite over the Citadel. Like, I know the Citadel has played tough, but VMI's had 2 weeks, and nobody knows the Citadel's offense better than VMI does. I like that one for the blowout. And then I'll take the 5.5 with Southeast Louisiana to give me the 3-pick on my parlay.
I love it. For me, I'm going to go back to the Southland well, but a little bit different thing than we usually preach. I'm going to go with the rare Southland Conference under, and the even rarer Southland Conference under involving these 2 teams, and that's Sam Houston, Incarnate Word, under set at 77 points. And I could very well be wrong. I mean, if we look at these 2 games, this point total could very easily hit 120, 125 points if things get Southland shenanigans on us. But I'm going to take the under at 77 points purely because of Sam's defense. We've seen them the past couple weeks. They're just simply not giving up enough points, I don't think, even against that high-powered UIW offense. Sam Houston has, arguably the best defensive coordinator in the FCS in Clayton Carlin. He's had plenty of time to watch tape on this exciting freshman and this star running back that everyone knows about in that UIW offense. So I think not only because of the Sam defense, but I think if Sam Houston gets up by a touchdown or 2 and this game's in control, you might see them, be a little bit more reluctant to put a few of those star players out on the field field for every single play. Just make sure everyone's healthy, rest them up for the postseason, because unlike a lot of teams, Sam Houston's playing a full schedule this spring. So they're my first pick is the under on that one. Second pick is Mercer. I'm surprised to see them at a 4.5-point underdog. They're playing Samford, and they're fighting for a playoff spot. Potentially, I think they're a little bit on the outside of the picture, but they can definitely go in there and change some people's minds with a double-digit win. And I think even if they lose that one, I think it's going to be by a field goal or so. So give me Mercer plus the 4.5 points. And then to close it out, going with another 4.5-point spread, but taking the favorite in this one, going to go with Alabama A&M against Alabama State. Big rivalry there, but I just look at Alabama A&M and I see a team that we haven't seen a lot of this year, and I'm kind of disappointed about that because early on I was one of the few people I think that gave them a top 25 vote at one point this season, but absolutely steamrolled a couple of quality teams in Jackson State and South Carolina State. So I see that, and I see them easily able to beat Alabama State by a touchdown or more.
I like it. I like all of those. That Southeast, I mean, that Southland, you
never know what's going to happen. It's
so
an extreme.
hard for me to take an under in the Southland, especially.
But it's like the one week we told people to.
Yep, that's true. The 1 week we told them, who knows? It'll be interesting. I could see a high flying game, especially if Incarnate Word gets the run game going and they're able to put some points on the board early. That's going to force Sam Houston to open it up. And if they open it up, it's just it'll be a 60 to 50 something game for sure over there. But I like those picks.
No doubt. Well, that's all we got for you guys this week. I'm Josh Criswell. He's the coach. Gene Clemons. You've been listening to FCS Rundown with Criswell and the coach. Make sure to download, listen, and subscribe to the podcast. Drop us a rating and review. We're on Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts. We've got you covered. We'll talk to you next time.
5 stars.